my name is Samantha May, and welcome to Reality Talks, the podcast where we spill the tea on reality. In this episode, we are going to discuss a movement that has recently gained further recognition due to the occurrence of events that have inspired pandemonium in 2020. However, once we unpack this subject, you might realize that maybe everything isn't 2020's fault after all, but rather society's as a whole. Today's episode is going to focus on 3 words in particular that most of you may have heard: Black Lives Matter. So, let's get started. BLM is a movement that protests against systemic brutality and discrimination against Black people across the globe. While the civil rights movement originated in the 1940s, the phrase Black Lives Matter was brought up and popularized in 2013. It all began with a hashtag after the death of a Black teenager named Trayvon Martin. Martin was shot to death during a walk to a family friend's house in Sanford, Florida. His killer, George Zimmerman, was found not guilty, and so the Black Lives Matter hashtag began trending on social media. Alicia Garza was the first to use this phrase in a Facebook post in response to Martin's unfair murder. She co-founded the BLM campaign with partners Patrisse Cullors and Opal Tometi. The hashtag Black Lives Matter quickly grew mainstream across multiple platforms, being used whenever a Black person was killed by police brutality, or whenever a Black person was never justified. In 2020, the BLM movement had a resurgence in popularity after the death of a Black man named George Floyd on May 25th of this year. Floyd was murdered by a white officer named Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis. When Floyd was shopping at the store, he was accused of using a counterfeit bill. The police arrived at the scene and proceeded to arrest him. Moments later, Chauvin pressed his knee into Floyd's neck as the latter was pinned on the ground suffocating. A witness recorded this event, capturing Floyd crying out that he could not breathe. Chauvin and the other 3 officers at the scene refused to help Floyd, and Chauvin refused to move his knee despite Floyd's desperate cries. After 8 minutes and 46 seconds of being pinned to the ground, Floyd died. To this day, the officers have not been delivered to justice. This caused people across social media platforms to use the Black Lives Matter hashtag once again, and a protest in Minneapolis inspired thousands of other protests across the globe. Floyd, unfortunately, was not the first or the only individual to suffer from police brutality this year. There are countless lists of names of innocent Black people to die at the hands of police and hate crimes this year alone. Amongst these many names is Breonna Taylor. She was a Black woman who was shot in her sleep after 3 police officers attacked her house, and the officers were not wearing their uniforms. They attempted to serve a no-knock warrant for a narcotics investigation, but they appeared as intruders to Taylor's boyfriend, who fired his gun in self-defense. Taylor was shot a total of 8 times by the officers at the scene in Louisville on March 13th due to being caught in the officers' fire. In addition to Taylor and others that have been murdered in 2020, other police brutality victims in 2019 have not received justice. Elijah McClain, for example, was another Black man who was trying to walk home at night but was strangled by officers. This took place in Aurora, a suburb in Denver, when McClain was coming home from the grocery store with a ski mask on. He was anemic and the mask provided him warmth after buying tea. On that night, August 30th of last year at 10:30 p.m., 3 Colorado officers confronted him due to a 911 caller claiming he was sketchy. Thankfully, many people have risen to protest these outrageous actions across multiple locations, including within Lyndhurst. Lyndhurst hosted 2 protests in June, with teenagers taking on a major role at these events. I personally participated in these rallies, the first one being a march down Ridge Road and the second being in front of the library. I am fully supportive of BLM and believe that it delivers an important message against racial discrimination across the United States. The protests and petitions people have organized and created have done a lot to spread awareness regarding police brutality against Black people. Though systemic racism has not gone away and remains very prominent, the movement has given many Black people a voice. Black Lives Matter has also given people of color a voice in general, and LGBTQ+ lives have also been a focus. BLM serves to fight an oppressive society dominated by white people, and in that belief, other people of color besides Black people are granted an opportunity to speak their truth regarding how racism affects them as well. Also, because the civil rights movement protests inspired protests for LGBTQ+ people, they are defended in this movement. Hashtags such as Black Gay Lives Matter and Black Trans Lives Matter have even circulated as a result. In the approximately half a year since Floyd's death, multiple changes have been made. State laws have been passed such as those that allow for police disciplinary records to be public. Furthermore, there is talk of defunding the police in Minneapolis as the people have demanded. Dallas police are also making it a duty that officers intervene when other officers are using excessive force. Multiple police departments overall are planning to reform their guidelines for officers to lessen brutality rates. While there is so much more work to be done, for the police system was built on racism, These changes demonstrate that the Black Lives Matter movement is not useless nor exaggerated as the opposition claims. In my community, there have unfortunately been counter-protesters that care more about protecting officers than they do about protecting Black people. At the library protest, for example, an older white man was being disrespectful during a kneel, which was in respect to the 8 minutes and 46 seconds it took to kill George Floyd. People were also driving by and shouting disrespectful phrases at the protesters. In this country as a whole, some people try to limit the movement's potential by attacking protesters, spreading hate across social media, and overwhelming hashtags with white supremacist propaganda. Many of the people against BLM are only against it because they feel as though they're being attacked by it. When they hear Black Lives Matter, their brains translate it to White Lives Don't Matter, which couldn't be farther from the truth. Nobody is saying white people don't deserve to live. They're just shining a light on the Black lives being put at risk. That's something many of these people that chant All Lives Matter need to understand. They say that exact phrase to silence the voices of BLM too. They don't understand that for all lives to matter, Black lives need to matter. White privilege is a very real issue, especially in this country. It's what allows for me as a white person to only need to worry about a ticket if I were ever pulled over in the car with my dad. However, if a Black person were pulled over, their biggest concern would be their life. Unlike a Black person, I will never need to worry about being judged for my hairstyle, an officer mistaking a hairbrush for a gun, women clutching their purses if I'm next to them in an elevator, and more. However, it is not my job to speak for Black people, nor is it my place to speak over them. This movement is for them, not for me and other white people to feel like better people. I try to participate in this movement by utilizing my social media platforms to share posts made by Black people and other people of color facing discrimination in the United States. Black Lives Matter is not a political debate that's too intense for white people to discuss. It is a movement that focuses on basic human rights. That should never be a debate. Ever. In addition to these discussions, I've also made room for discussions about homophobia, Islamophobia, environmental issues, misogyny, and more. With that being said, I'm wrapping this episode up. I encourage you all to sign petitions and read about this issue yourselves. Whether you're white or a person of color, we all must participate in achieving equity. Goodbye. I hope to talk to you again about other important issues.